check sheet should be a reasonably simple and practical way for an employer to bring somebody into their business and make them aware of their requirements and their systems and procedures around health and safety. Important because they should capture lots of information about the individual. They should enable the employer to check that they're getting the full information in terms of the individual's health and well-being, their underlying health status, that type of thing. It should also form a checklist that allows the employer really to make sure that the employer has given the employee practical guidance around all the things that they would want to know when they're joining their business. I would say if it's done well, then it means that it saves a lot of time for the employer and peace of mind, because it creates a sort of structured process so that nothing is missed. And then also means that it signposts the new employee to all the things that they'd want to be aware of, both in terms of practical risk management, where the hazards are and how to avoid them, but also how to, do things as well as possible. And often good safety, hopefully, is about doing things well. The two are entirely compatible.
Yeah. So who needs to be completing these induction check sheets?
Well, in simple terms, anybody that's joining the business. It could be somebody joining, for example, in a full-time role, where they've been recruited for a permanent position. You would want to take that individual through a full induction process. The same for somebody who may be joining in a part-time capacity, depending on what they're doing. You might vary the content of the induction. You might want them to know more about specific things, and there might also be areas which didn't apply. And it's worth flagging that you'd want to also tie that in with your HR practices. So if you're issuing contracts for employments and company handbooks of the do's and don'ts on the farm around the estate, it will be helpful to make sure that the two are entirely compatible. So that's full-time, part-time. Also casuals, if you're bringing in people for harvest, for example, or at certain times of the year, you really want to make sure that they're fully versed with all the necessary information. And if they're coming back year on year, even if it's the same people, it's a good idea, and it's recommended that you rerun the process, because you may be doing things slightly differently. You may have changed the way that you're operating equipment, for example, or you may be operating in different fields with different hazards, such as overhead power lines, maybe irrigating in a different way, silaging in a different way. Or you may have bought that. Any changes really should be reflected in the induction. It's important to keep that induction up. So even if they're casuals who say they know the business well, the lay of the land, it would be a good idea to do an induction. And I suppose the fourth category would be if you've had somebody who's a full-timer or been in employment for a period of time who has been out of the business. Perhaps they've been away, they've been studying, or they may have been ill. When you're bringing them back into the business, it would be a good idea to rerun the induction as well.
Great. So what sort of things should be included in these induction check sheets?
Well, a good induction check sheet captures all of the basic information for the individual, subject to GDPR, and it's important to mention that once you're gathering this information, it's got to be held securely. It is private to the individual, and it should really only be held for the purposes of helping to manage them and record information that is relevant to their well-being and their employment with the business. So it's the basic stuff: names, addresses, dates of birth. It would also want to include any training and information on training that they've had, so that you're gathering that and identifying the good news, where they're trained and where you can use them, but also possibly where they may have gaps in their knowledge or awareness, and you'd want to plug those gaps through training. And that doesn't necessarily mean sending them off to sit in a classroom. That could be practical guidance, half a day induction on your tractor and trailer operations, or a piece of equipment that you're going to have them operating, and that can be done by an experienced operator. So it's not necessarily creating another piece of paper or creating another cost for you. It's just making sure gaps are plugged.
Yeah.
They also that the basics around, do they know, for example, where your first aid provision is? Do they know where fire extinguishers are? Do they know what emergency escape routes, if you've got workshops or tea rooms or welfare facilities and they might be adjacent to other areas? Do they know what your risk assessments are? Do they know your health and safety policy? All of those points should be flagged for their information. And of course, things like safe working practices or method statements, as they're sometimes called, bringing those to their attention so that they are fully informed. And that might mean that they need to read and be communicated with and around for a couple of hours or longer. Depends on the size of the business and how diverse their activities are, really.
Yeah. And how often and regularly do these need to be conducted, would you say?
I think that depends on circumstances. I mean, the short answer is certainly when somebody joins the business or returns to the business, as we've said. So right at the start of their employment, and I would say it's very important that that's done on day one and not sometime into it, because we're all the same. We're running busy businesses, weather dependent, and generally speaking, if somebody joins and starts becoming useful to you, it's going to be more difficult to take them away, particularly if the sun's shining, from what you want them to do. To do this, it's going to seem like a bigger job down the line. So I would say day one, morning one, when they first join. And that also sends out the right messages to them, I would suggest, in that it's saying, this is of paramount importance to us. Your well-being is very important to us, and therefore we're going to deal with that at the start. It also means that if you're picking up on any issues or concerns, they're addressed immediately. And again, it's saying to the individual, we would like you to explain to us or let us know anything that we need to know before you actually start physically operating in our farmyards or in our fields or across the woodland or across the estate or farm in general. Beyond that, as I say, they'd be potentially used again if somebody was rejoining the business, or they could be used if you'd had, say, a serious incident, or hopefully you wouldn't, touch wood, but if you'd had an event that meant that you felt that retraining was required, and that retraining could be in the form of them rereading certain operators' manuals or safe working practices, or just having a team meeting. You might use that as a basis, almost a checklist, a prompt for a manager or yourself as the owner to make sure that all those bases are covered. There's two main routes, really. Unless you're very IT savvy or you're using various software technology, the common route would be a paper document, which the individual would complete and then normally sign off, and that would be held within the office. And again, it's important to stress it's not just a tick box exercise. The information as a manager or administrator that you do receive is information that you would want to double check, verify. So if somebody's put, they have a serious underlying health condition, for example, like a history of heart condition or diabetes, that as a business, you're making sure you're picking up that information, you know what to do with it, and you're making adjustments if it's required. So I would say that's absolutely critical. So there are various apps coming through. Again, it's important to make sure that you're getting the right one, and I wouldn't advocate, charging headlong down that route unless you're sure you can cover it adequately, and you're sure that your team are able to use it, because these apps, a lot of them are very new, they are evolving, and if you put something in front of people who are perhaps not using that type of technology as their standards of day job and it doesn't work, it can switch them off. So unless you've got a really good IT system, the conventional piece of paper that is then held securely in the office is a good way to go.